Friends, hello. This is Voices for Earth Justice, not live. We're having some problems with the live feed to Facebook, so I'm just going to record this, and you're watching this much later on, but it's still going to be a great conversation with Brian Peterson-Roest of Bees in the D. If you caught his introduction when you were trying to watch it on Facebook, I know you want to hear it again because it's a good one. Brian started keeping bees in 2010, so about 10 years ago. The muse that inspired Bees in the D was a walk Brian took in Battery Park in New York City. And there he watched as thousands of people walked by the Bee Village, an apiary and one of the city's top tourist attractions. Brian learned that more than 4 million people visit Battery Park every year. And it got him thinking, if bees could coexist with human beings in New York City, couldn't they coexist even better with human beings in Detroit? And from that question, Brian started Bees in the D, a 501c3 nonprofit that works to bring together Detroit businesses, nonprofits, schools, and residents to promote the health of honeybee colonies in the city. Brian is on a mission to make Detroit a national leader in the conservation of pollinators and promotion of urban beekeeping. So far, Bees in the D has introduced 9 million bees in 160 hives in 50 locations in Southeast Michigan. 9 million. When he's not keeping bees and running Bees in the D, Brian is a 5th grade teacher at Musson Elementary School in Rochester Hills, Michigan. He is also an adjunct professor at Oakland University. Brian serves on boards for the Michigan Science Teachers Association, Michigan Urban Farming Initiative, and Oakland University School of Education. Brian is the recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching, which he received from President Barack Obama in a ceremony at the White House. He also received the Michigan Science Teacher of the Year Award and the Human Excellence in Teaching Award. And so, once again, we're very honored and pleased to welcome Brian Peterson-Roest. Brian, let's try this again, shall we?
Of course. Thank you again for that introduction.
So I was just asking you, it's kind of funny because our program today was delayed by a week because a week ago, you had what I called a bee emergency when I told everybody why we weren't able to go on the air a week ago. And that bee emergency was a swarm, which sounds really scary to a lot of people. So why don't you explain to us what you were doing last week with this swarm?
Yeah, swarms are very common this time of year. And most beekeepers are kind of like a doctor on call. We're waiting for those calls and they may pop up at any time. So what a swarm is honeybees have very large colonies. They're known as a superorganism. And those colonies can outgrow their hive or their cavity or wherever they're located. And instinctively, as they run out of room, they draw out some cells to make a new queen. And the old queen then takes about 50 to 60% of the population of that hive and leaves the hive, leaving behind about 50% of the population for the new queen. And that queen flies out and lands in a tree. Today we had one on a wall. So then all those thousands of bees, literally 10 to 20,000 of bees, surround that queen bee. And that's what's known as a swarm. Now, unfortunately, swarms have kind of gotten a bad reputation because we think of Alfred Hitchcock and the birds where they're coming down on you and attacking. That really is not the temperament of a swarm at all. They actually are very docile when they're in swarming condition, and they just are waiting on that tree branch or that wall because scout bees are going out to try to find a new home. And once they find an empty cavity, they come back to the collective. They do a waggle dance to communicate this new location. And once they agree to this location, they take off and they go into that new location. So a lot more to a swarm than what people think. But yes, I did get a call that day and was able to capture it. And that swarm, I believe, I can't remember where I put it, but I think we put it at the Whitney, which is the restaurant downtown.
Wow, cool. So it sounds like a swarm, which sounds scary to most people, actually is indicative of healthy bees. Like, would it be correct to
Oh,
say that
definitely. And
if
then
there are more swarms happening in an area, it means that bees are multiplying?
yes, and I will say this though, just like many animals, there's many different breeds. And so different breeds of bees tend to be more swarmy, if that's the word, than other breeds. And so you may get one hive that swarms many times. And ultimately, beekeepers want to keep their hives from swarming, because if you lose half of your population, you lose half of the work. And that's especially if you're a commercial beekeeper, you're dependent on that honey production. But if you have, 50% less workers, there's going to be less honey. So that is something. By adding woodenware to the hives, we keep that from happening. But it is nature. And even adding woodenware, sometimes the genetics go and swarm, and that's their way of passing their gene on and reproducing.
When you say woodenware, do you mean like those stackable kind of box things that go on
Yes.
top?
And BT, I
Okay.
appreciate you clarifying, because I use bee language all the time, and I forget that not everybody knows that language. So yes, woodenware is the hives that you see beekeepers using. The most common one is called the Langstroth hive, and it's just those white boxes that you see stacked up.
Okay, so I got another. You used some other bee jargon when you and I were talking before we went live, and you said that the hive, the swarm that you were dealing with today, you had to do a split, or I think is what you
Yes.
said, a split.
So sometimes beekeepers are going to beat the bees to the swarm. If we notice the population is extremely strong and they are running out of room, we can add woodenware, but sometimes they'll draw out queen cells. And so what we can do as the beekeeper is we can literally split the hive, just like it sounds, where we take a fair amount of frames, especially the frames that have the queen cells on them, and we make a whole new hive. And we just did that today with one of our hives, and that split went up on top of the Foundation Hotel, downtown Detroit.
Nice. So I want to ask you about pollinators. This is a word that we use some at Voices for Earth Justice, and anybody who eventually is watching this probably throws around little bit. I don't know if we're necessarily using it correctly. I've been learning about this myself. What are pollinators, and why are they so important? Why should we care about this so much?
So let me first start by saying bees are one of the main pollinators, but not the only pollinators. Some of the hornets and wasps do pollinating. Hummingbirds, there's bats that do pollinating. There's beetles. I mean, the list goes on and on. And then if you go down to the tropics, there's mammals that actually do pollinating. But bees traditionally are the ones we think of. And then when we're talking bees, it's usually honeybees that do most of the pollinating. And I'll explain why in just a second. But I think it's worth saying that there are a lot of different species of bees in the world, 20,000 different pollinating bees. So honeybees are not the only ones. And actually, honeybees are not native to North America. They were brought over for that very purpose of pollinating our crops. And so what happens is plants are designed differently. So there's some plants like corn, like wheat, that are self-pollinating, meaning that the wind, or they're wind pollinated, can blow and it pollinates the flower so it can go to seed or to fruit. But a lot of our food, like apples, like blueberries, like almonds, and the list goes on and on, they need cross-pollination. And that's where an insect comes in, or like I said, other animals, and they carry the pollen from one flower to another, which then allows it to go to seed or fruit. And that is so important for our industry, our food industry. They say 1 of every 3 bites that we eat relies on pollinators. But I want you to also think about this. a lot of the foods that animals in the food chain or humans eat, like if you are an eater of meat from cattle, alfalfa needs to be pollinated. And so we need the bees to provide the food, which then provides for the dairy industry. And so it really is a pretty cool domino effect, or the food chain. I mean, as we know it and we learned as kids.
Wow. So now that you've told us that about pollinators, and we know that honeybees are one of the most important pollinators, you are on this mission, right? 9 million, I think, is the number I read a few minutes ago. 9 million bees your organization is introduced to Southeast Michigan. How are we doing? How would you describe the health of our pollinators here in Detroit and its surrounding?
I really feel like we're on an upswing or an uptick because of the awareness. I think that's one of the most important things, and that's one of the key reasons that we started our organization. We wanted to be a voice for the bees because there's a lot of misconceptions that can happen. We think of the yellow jackets and the hornets that can be extremely defensive. I would even use the word aggressive. And when we're at the apple orchards, especially in the fall, and we have these quote unquote bees in our cider and all around us, those aren't bees at all. Those are actually wasps, yellow jackets, but we blame the bees. But there's been a real shift in that, where people are extremely supportive of our pollinators and bees and understand the importance of them. And I think that's why we've been so well received. Also in Detroit, I mean, if you think about it right there, you guys have an amazing garden. There are so many urban gardens, and those gardens are providing food resources for neighbors, for neighborhoods. And by having bees there, we increase the amount of yield that is there. And so that's another really important thing. We want to educate people about that and their importance, but then it also allows them to eat food that is organically grown and they know the source of it. So many kids, especially even adults, don't know where their food comes from.
So 9 million sounds like a lot of bees. All right, but your mission is not done. So when will your mission be done? Like how many bees do we need to have to say that we have a healthy ecosystem for pollinators here in Southeast Michigan? And when will you say, that's it, we've accomplished our mission, we're done?
Wow, that's that's a really great question and something I've never thought about. I do want to share that we spread across 5, now 6 counties, and even go into Canada. And so we're hitting a very large geographic area. And so really we could keep going and going and going, because bees go about a 3 to 5 mile radius of their hive. And so we are trying to fill those gaps where we're not sure if there are hives, and we call it our bee highway. So really our mission will just continue, and we'll keep growing as long as we can sustain it. And actually we've had to put the brakes on a little bit. A lot of homeowners would love to have bees with us, but because of the response being so great with businesses and other nonprofits and urban gardens, that's our main focus right now. But as we grow, and we're all volunteer, there's a board of about 10 of us. But as we grow and our volunteer base grows and I train more beekeepers, we'll be able to keep expanding. And I know when you hear 9 million, you're thinking, holy cow, that's a lot of hives. And it is. I mean, we're at about 170 hives. But there's about 60,000 bees in the summertime in every hive. So that number grows, it multiplies very quickly. So when we get our hives there at your garden, the 2 hives, it's going to be upwards of 120,000 bees right there that are going out and pollinating your garden, the neighbor's gardens, the tomato plant that you have on your patio. I mean, it really is remarkable.
Will range 3 to 5 miles. So where there's a hive, those honeybees will go 3 to 5 miles from that hive.
Yeah, ideally they would prefer to stay closer because that's less, distance that they have to go. They can pollinate more, and it's less energy that they have to use, so they don't have to eat as much of their own honey and resources. But they will go upwards of 5 miles. And so what we do is we like to pull out a map, and we use an app called Hive Tracks, which puts our hives on the map of Southeast Michigan, and it puts a ring around that hive about 3 miles so that we can see where we have pockets that we would love to put hives so that we can fill those gaps. Because one of the biggest things I hear from people, especially in Detroit, is we used to see bees on our flowers all the time, and now we don't see bees. And so hearing people go, oh my gosh, we saw honeybees again, is so rewarding. And it's so exciting to hear people be excited about their friendly visitors coming to their gardens.
What happened to the bees that people used to see? I mean, what are some particular challenges for the honeybee population here in Metro Detroit?
Wow, I could do a 2-hour seminar just on that. The poor bees, that's another reason we want to help so much. It seems like they have so many strikes. There's so many things that are going against them. And so let's talk natural first. There are many different diseases, bacterial diseases, and it can really harm the health of the bees. The biggest factor right now, or that's been happening for the last about decade, is a parasite that's known as the varroa mite. And the varroa mite literally lives on the bees. You can see it like with the human eye, and they weaken the beehive because they're sucking energy from the bees. So we do have to do treatments for that. And then unfortunately, humans have had a part in the decline as well. Loss of habitat, pesticides is a huge one. And so we're really trying to educate people, and we're seeing an uptick, especially in the urban areas, of bees. And actually, we're working with some great companies like the Honeybee Conservancy of New York, Best Bees, who has bees throughout the nation, and now the University of Detroit, or U of D, and Oakland University. And we're looking at the health of bees, and we are finding that bees that live in the city areas or the urban areas are healthier and doing better than our bees that are even out into the rural and suburb areas.
Why is that? That is so interesting. Why are they doing better in the city than out in the suburb and the rural areas?
So there was a lot of studies done on that. And at first, people just thought because there's less pesticides. Obviously, when you're out in the rural areas, a lot of the farms and the orchards, they do have to use certain treatments to keep the worms out of the apples and the bugs that are eating up the crops. But the more studies that they've done, and this is pretty cool, they have found that the diversity of plants is greater in an urban area, believe it or not, than out in the rural areas, because what we've done is we've created so many mono societies where it is just fields and fields of the same plant, which is not good for pollinators. And this is affecting not just the honeybees, but the native pollinators. So a lot of farmers and ranchers and are now doing rows of wildflowers so that diversity is there to help bring up the health of the bees.
That is so interesting. Never would have thought that. Okay, so you busted a myth for us. It's not really a myth, but a while ago you said when you go to the apple orchard in the fall and the yellow jackets and stuff, they're swarming all around. Those aren't bees. And you said bees get a bad rap because of that. What are some other bee myths that you like to bust for people that don't know?
So a lot of people don't realize that honeybees are a one sting and done, unlike the hornets and the wasp. Honeybees have a barb on the end of their stinger, and it is last resort. So they don't want to sting unless they have to defend their hive especially. Now, occasionally honeybees will feel trapped, like you step on them or something like that, and it may result in a sting. But a lot of people don't realize that when they sting you, the stinger stays in you. It actually rips the bee and the bee perishes. And so unlike wasp and hornets that can sting repetitively. The other thing is honeybees really are not very interested in your picnic. And a lot of people think they are because of the yellow jackets, which are omnivores. They will eat the meat, they will eat the sweet things, they will eat your everything. Yellow jackets love anything that they can get their little mandibles on because they're scavengers. Honeybees are interested in flowers. They want that rich nectar, that rich pollen, because that's what they need to bring back to their hive to sustain them throughout the winter. The other little misconception that's really cool to talk about is winter. Most animals will hibernate or die off in the winter. Honeybees do not hibernate. They actually create their own heat. So what they do is they vibrate their wing muscles and their body muscles to create friction, and friction creates heat. And believe it or not, even on those -degree weather in the winter, they keep the queen at a balmy 90 degrees to get them through the winter time. She's the most important. And they rotate that ball or that cluster, as it's called, in their hive so that they don't freeze. And they move that cluster throughout the hive so that they can live off of the honey that they stored up.
That is so cool. So what happens then, Brian, when people take the honey out of the hive? I've actually always wondered this. If the bee, when we take the honey out of the hive, what do they eat?
Great question. And so that's why you have to be careful as a beekeeper. It's very tempting to want to take that honey because you want to sell it or you want to eat it yourself. But ultimately, you keep a lot of honey in the hive for them. So let me just down below, there's boxes. The two bottom boxes, which we call the brood chambers, or they're known as deeps. We do not touch the honey down there, and they store honey along with where the queen lays the eggs. We leave about 80 to 100 pounds of honey in every hive come winter time. And we do supplemental feed as well. But we're lucky that bees are very, very productive. And their goal is just to make as much honey as possible because they'd rather have too much than not enough. And most hives make surplus honey. And that's the honey that are in the upper boxes that beekeepers can harvest, do a light filtering. We don't pasteurize. We keep our honey raw because of all the great qualities. And you filter it lightly and jar it up. And so we make sure that we leave enough for them for winter. And you just can't be greedy as a beekeeper.
So we're gonna, you mentioned it a couple minutes ago, Voices for Earth Justice, we're getting some bees in the D hives at Hope House and Gardens this year. Our schedule's all messed up because of COVID-19 and there's the backlog and we need to, it's not bees in the D, we've got to cut some trees down so the bees have sunlight. But tell us about the process of setting up a new hive. What is that like? How do the bees acclimate to a new place? And what kind of things can the neighbors expect?
So great question. And there's not one path to introducing bees. So it's a little late now in the season to order packages. And packages are literally a wooden crate. Some of them are plastic that have a queen inside of it in a cage to protect her because a lot of times it's a new queen and they have to accept her pheromones. And it has about 10,000 bees in it. And it's just a package that literally you dump into the hive. And I entice the bees to stay and like their new home by putting some frames with already drawn comb in it or a frame of honey. So it's kind of like saying your cupboards already have a little bit of food and they're like, hey, this home is great. It's already got stocked cupboards. So that's one avenue, a package. The one that we're going to use is something called a nuke or a nucleus. And that is like a 5-frame box of bees that already has a laying queen and accepted queen inside of it. And we literally just take the frames and transfer them into the new box or the new hive. Take 5 frames out, put 5 frames full of bees and brood and the queen in, and basically they're getting a bigger home with more room. And so they usually, almost always, I've only had, I think, in my history of beekeeping, 1 nuke that has ever left. And they accept it, and they're very happy. Now, you also heard me talk about a split, which you can do, and you heard me talk about a swarm. So I can put a swarm in a hive as well. And they usually, because of the dimensions and how the hive is, they love it and they don't want to leave it. So that's how you introduce the hives. You ask, what can the neighbors expect? Really no change. I know it sounds like a lot of bees, but not all the bees go out and forage. They have different jobs that are in the hive. So some are nurse bees, some are, guard bees, some are undertakers, some are, like making the wax. But foragers will go out and they're going in every which direction. So the only thing that neighbors will really see that's different is probably more bees on their flowering trees and in their gardens and on their flowers. But honeybees are so docile, when they see humans, they fly off, especially when they're out in the field.
I didn't know that. I didn't know honeybees avoid humans. I guess that's another myth that you just busted.
Yeah, they really do. There's no interest from humans for honeybees. Like, there's nothing that they really want. They're too busy literally trying to find food sources and bringing nectar and pollen back to the hive.
Okay, so because of our technical difficulties earlier, we don't have as much time and we're running out. So I got to jam in 2 more questions here real quick. The first one I'm going to ask you is probably the one that you've been asked 600 times in the last 2 weeks. What about these murder hornets?
So yeah, there was quite the buzz about those, and it was kind of sensationalized quite a bit. They do exist. If you haven't seen videos about them, please do me a favor and watch the National Geographic ones. What the honeybees have figured out where these giant Asian hornets actually live is to cook that scout hornet alive. It is fascinating, but unfortunately, they've been introduced to Europe, and the European honeybees don't know that trick yet. Nature has a way of righting itself. And unfortunately, there's been 2 bees, that have been found over in Washington State. There has not been they did not find a colony of any kind. I think people just love the idea of talking about giant killer hornets along with COVID. We don't really have, in my opinion, much to worry about. And most people that study bees are saying the same. We just need to keep a watchful eye to make sure that this species, which could become another invasive species, doesn't get established. But then there'll be things that we can do by putting guards out in front of the hives, the entrance, so the hornets can't enter. The bees are much, much smaller than these giant hornets.
That's a relief. That puts my mind a little bit at ease there. Okay, so last question is, how can people help? How can that it'd be nice to have more volunteer beekeepers, for example. But if people want to help honeybees in Southeast Michigan, how can everyday people do that?
Okay, so let me talk about something, because not everybody's going to want to have bees, obviously. But we called our Detroit Bee Highway, and the reason we call that is there's 3 essentials that living things need. And I'll try to go quickly through this. They need food, they need water, they need shelter. Bees in the D is very happy to help with the shelter by providing hives throughout the city and in neighboring counties. But here's where you can help with the food and water. If you put out a bowl of water with rocks in it so the bees can land on something, or a bird bath, an extra bird bath, or those mini bird baths with water in it, that's very helpful to all pollinators. And then a lot of us have an area in our yard that probably gets a fair amount of sun that maybe just grass. Just cut out, one little area of grass and plant some wildflower seeds and really focus on maybe getting some of the natives so that we can have our native pollinators like milkweed for the monarchs, and the bees love milkweed as well. And you can create a way station for those bees to get food, to stop and rest, and then of course, like we said, to get water. The other way that you can help is please support your local beekeepers. Instead of buying your honey maybe from a dollar store or from some of the large chain stores, get it from a farmer's market, get it from a local beekeeper, because then your honey is locally sourced. You're helping local beekeepers so that they continue this, because beekeeping can be expensive, especially with all these ailments and bee populations dying. You have to get new bees, which isn't cheap. The other thing that you can do is just spread the good word about pollinators. Try to kindly educate people about the difference between wasp and bees. And then, of course, if you are able to, organizations like Bees in the D or other organizations, we always appreciate donations. And like you said, we have so many wonderful volunteers. Things are a little bit on hold right now, but if you'd like to learn to become a beekeeper, I do offer workshops. Hopefully we'll be able to offer them again soon once things open up again.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I shared the Bees in the D web address. It's scrolling at the bottom of the screen here, beesinthed.org. We'll also, when we put out this video, share some of what you shared with us in the post, as well as your web address, so that people can volunteer, donate, and I think we've got some sunny places in our backyard here, so maybe we'll be planting some wildflowers real soon. Brian, sorry we had to cut you off. We know that you can talk for a long time about honeybees, and it's all good. Next time we have you on, we'll ask you about your visit to the White House, because I know people will want to hear about that as well. But thank you for the work that you do. You work really, really hard. You are a really, really busy person, busy like a bee. So thank you for sharing some time with us today. And we look forward to seeing your hive soon at Hope House and Gardens. And this will be the first of many conversations.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing our webpage, because there's a lot of wonderful resources, educational sources. I've even done some lessons that you can do with your family at home, especially during this time. And then on social media, we're constantly putting up facts, and there's short videos just at Bees in the D. So you can follow us there as well to learn a lot about bees.
Very good. We'll be sure to share all that. Brian, thank you so much for being our guest today. And we wish you well as you try to introduce the next 9 million bees to Southeast Michigan.
And thank you, BT, for having us, and thank you for believing in our mission. We're so excited that we can add you to the list of partners and have hives there at your gardens. So thank you.
We're really excited. It's a pleasure. We'll talk again soon, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.